Hello, thank you for tuning into my channel. My name's Stuart, the Unrepentant Atheist, and today I'm going to be reviewing quite an old video from 2010, Mike Licona versus Roger Carrier. I won't have too much to say about it because, to be honest with you, I know what I think of the debate and I haven't made any notes. I've just got a few general points to make, well, general and specific. But before I come on to that, of course, I've not made any videos in the last week, which is almost like a miracle for me, because at one stage I was making one a day, but I kind of ran out of steam with it a bit. Obviously, I'm not a full-time atheist. I know that Christians are full-time Christians, but I'm not a full-time atheist in the sense that, you know, this is like in a way, it's like a kind of hobby for me. Of course, Christians will say they're not full-time Christians, but this is one of the big differences between, obviously with atheism, I mean, it doesn't really impact your life in the same way that Christianity does. Obviously, Christianity is like, you know, God is sort of there all the time. And I mean, it would be absurd for me to say that God isn't there all the time for me, because obviously, if you're an atheist, then you've got no dogmas and doctrines following you around full time. You've not got to be concerned 100% of the time that somebody up there might be watching you. But with atheism, you haven't got that concern. You just go about and do your own thing obviously within the law and within commonly accepted morality. But anyway, I'm digressing. Let me just move on. What have I been reading recently before I move on to the debate? So I picked this up in a second-hand bookshop, The Blind Watchmaker, Richard Dawkins. I don't know a massive amount about evolution, and I thought that, you know, the mechanics of it, I know the basics, but I thought it would be a good idea. I've heard a lot about this book. It was written in the 80s by Richard Dawkins, and I've read a few chapters, and I'm absolutely blown away by it. I mean, the way that he writes, his style, and the way that he explains things, there's so much humour there, and he's got such a colourful way of writing and explaining things that you just want to keep reading and reading. There's one little thing I don't understand, and I'm hoping that he'll come to that, because obviously I appreciate that the whole idea of evolution, what enables it to happen, that we've got these random mutations, and that, how can I put it, certain of these mutations are selected to move on to the next generation, to breed, and gradually, with all the incremental steps, the species will change with time. And Dawkins used a really interesting kind of analogy. He came up with a sentence which was like a target sentence, and he devised a computer program. He scrambled the sentence into random characters, and he devised a computer program to create, based on those, I think there were 18 characters in the sentence. I can't remember how many it was, about a dozen random sets of characters based on basically scrambling the characters from that target sentence. He devised a program to pick out each set of characters which looked closest to the target one. So I think it was pick out 8 out of 12, and he kept going like this, and it took, I don't know how many selections, how many times they had to scramble it and successively pick out the set of characters which looks most like the target sentence. I'm not doing a very good job of describing this. I think you know where I'm going. And eventually, after, I don't know, a certain amount of time, it got to the exact permutation of characters, which is actually a quote from a Shakespeare play. And this was an analogy as to how evolution works. What I don't understand is, yet, in natural selection, we have these random mutations. As Dawkins said, there's no target. So it's not quite a perfect analogy, because there's no kind of target. It's like with a bird, you know. I mean, a bird, we all come from a common ancestor, and at some time, creatures obviously started to grow wings over millions of years. But natural selection did not have in mind, could not foresee. That's why it's called the blind watchmaker. Doesn't see anything. It was not aiming to create wings on this bird. So my question to any of you who know more about the theory of evolution than I do, I'm hoping that Dawkins will explain this. How does natural selection know, if it's got no target, which mutations to select or to reject? I'd be really interested to know that. But okay, let me move on. Leave in the comments if you know, if you can explain to me how that is, because obviously it's an automatic mechanism in nature, natural selection, and it doesn't just blindly select out these random mutations. It has to select them out based on something, and if it's not working towards a goal, on what criteria is it selecting out? So that's it, really. Okay, let me move on to Mike Licona and Richard Carrier. So Mike Licona is obviously he's a Christian. He's an apologist. I believe he's an academic, and I think he claims to be a historian in some sense. Richard Carrier is a historian. He's an ancient historian, and obviously his whole big subject is the New Testament, and he takes the view that obviously Jesus never existed, and he's got evidence for that. He's got a hypothesis, which obviously in the books he's written, he feels that he's got justification for that hypothesis, that Jesus never existed. So he's debating, and the subject of this debate in 2010, I think it was, is there good evidence for the resurrection of Jesus? Now, it struck me as a little strange that for a man for a scholar who has argued that Jesus didn't exist, that he would entertain this particular debate. It struck me that he should really be in debates on his specialist subject. In other words, was there a historical Jesus or not? But, of course, he obviously accepted this particular challenge. And it didn't surprise me too much, I suppose, that he kind of seemed to start from the premise that he was going to argue on Licona's terms, because Licona is coming from a position that he, in my view, absurdly makes the statement that he's working with facts, and the facts he is taking from the New Testament. Now, to me, this is one of the most absurd claims in academia. Secular historians do not regard the New Testament as historically accurate. They just don't. It doesn't meet the standards. And I found it quite interesting that Carrier was citing one example of his experience as an ancient historian, and why he thinks that he has got the credentials for assessing the New Testament as a historical document. And quite an interesting example, actually, quite trivial in a way. But as for the Romans, there's been some debate among scholars as to whether they had a foghorn or not. If you don't know what a foghorn is, it's a device which makes a loud sound. Ships use it when they're sailing in fog to warn other ships that obviously they're nearby. So it's not the evidence for apparently foghorns in the ancient world with the Romans is kind of a bit iffy. There's no sort of conclusive proof, evidence that foghorns existed in Roman times, but Carrier feels that, by looking at the evidence, there is probably just enough justification to say that there were foghorns. And one thing that he didn't say, which surprised me, because whether or not there were foghorns, whether the Romans had foghorns or not, is quite a trivial thing, really. And I think maybe this is what he was getting at. But with the foghorn, you would not need the same standard of evidence to accept that the Romans had foghorns that you would for the resurrection of Jesus. He didn't actually say that, but I think maybe that's what he was angling towards. So in other words, Carrier could accept that the Romans had foghorns on relatively, kind of low standards of evidence, because it's not a massive claim. But obviously the resurrection goes against the laws of nature, and it is a massive claim, and more evidence would be required than these 4 accounts that we've got and the letters of Paul, which are not really supported by any extra biblical documentation, certainly nothing contemporary. So they were having this debate, and it seemed to me that Carrier was accepting, kind of imagining that, okay, let's say that there was a crucifixion. Let's say A, there was a Jesus. Let's say B, he was crucified by Pontius Pilate. He was sentenced to death by Pontius Pilate, urged on by the Pharisees and obviously the Jews in power who wanted him out of the way, as well as the Romans. And that he was taken down dead, and that his body was taken to a tomb, and that I think after 3 days the tomb was empty, and there were some witnesses on the scene that came to the tomb to embalm the body, to anoint the body, women, Mary Magdalene, etc. And they got there was no body. And then there were these claims that they'd seen Jesus, they'd been to the apostles, and then the apostles, all 12 of them, apparently saw Jesus too. And Licona, in his own words almost, says, now we've got these facts here. How do we account for these facts? Now, to me, it offends me that he's using this word in such a abusive way. They're not facts because they haven't been confirmed. They're not facts. You might want them to be facts, but they are not facts until they've been confirmed, and they haven't been confirmed. There are some facts in the New Testament. Jerusalem is a city. That's a fact. Pontius Pilate was the procurator at that time. That's another fact. So we've got facts from the New Testament, but the actual narrative, the whole passion narrative, the crucifixion, the empty tomb, etc., is a story. It's a story, and a lot would say it's a myth. They are not facts, but Carrier, obviously, the debate would not last long if Carrier just simply said, well, look, we don't even know Jesus existed, and then he started saying, I'm going to pull the whole rug from under your feet, because and then, I mean, the debate is going to be over. Instead, he accepted Licona's getting away with this, saying, well, these are facts, etc., etc. The problem is, because he let him get away with that, Licona then shifted the burden of proof, and he said, well, how do you secular naturalists account for all these facts? And then Carrier starts saying, well, it could be, there's a theory of mass hallucinations, etc., that we see among these tribes and cults around about those times. So he's going through, Licona shifted the burden of proof, and then what that's enabling Licona to do is saying, yeah, but that's completely absurd. Do you expect us to believe that 12 12 apostles saw the saw all of them mass hallucinated seeing Jesus. There's no evidence for that. Not even in science is there any evidence for mass hallucinations of that type. And so because Carrier went along with this, this whole narrative, for the sake of argument, it enabled Licona to shift the burden of proof and claim that because Carrier could not present a coherent, well-supported alternative explanation for the facts, therefore, the most reasonable explanation in the absence of that is indeed that Jesus must have risen from the dead. I thought this whole thing was preposterous, and I couldn't believe that Carrier kind of let himself get into that position. And at the end of it, they put in their closing statements, and Licona just said, Rick has not presented an alternative explanation. Yeah, but the burden's not on him. The burden is not on anybody else to explain a set of circumstances presented in a narrative in order to defeat your position that a man rose from the dead. That's not required. But, because Carrier kind of played along with it, it enabled Licona to say that. And in his summing up, Carrier said, well, actually, I disagree with you there, because we've seen, that there are these mass hallucinations, etc., etc. And then he cited one or two modern scholars and some examples as well, of where there had been mass hallucinations. Personally, I wouldn't go for the mass hallucination hypothesis. I almost think it sounds almost as absurd as Licona is claiming. But I don't think that we need to get to that in order to say that there is not evidence for the resurrection. There's not good, sound, strong evidence for the resurrection. We don't need to get into that kind of absurdity of claiming that all 12 apostles were mass hallucinating, even though there may have been some of that going on at the time, because, with religious people, they can get themselves worked up, and the more worked up they can do things like speak in tongues, which of course is complete gibberish, or they can imagine that they've seen something. But I suppose that to imagine that all 12 of the apostles saw the risen Jesus, for me, there are far more likely things: A, that the narrative is not correct, is not historically accurate, that actually nobody saw anything at all. But I must say, just to be fair to Richard Carrier, that even if 10,000 people were claimed to have seen Jesus, the risen Jesus, in the New Testament, and even if Richard Carrier said that 10,000 hallucinated it, it's still always going to be more probable, no matter how improbable, but it's still going to be more probable that happened than that the man actually defied the laws of nature. His heart stopped for at least 3 days. So his brain must have been absolute mush, and he was definitively dead, and that he rose from the dead and he was seen walking. It must be more probable that any naturalistic explanation is better. And this is another thing I'll take issue with Mike Licona, is that he's saying that Jesus actually rising from the dead has got more explanatory power. No, unnaturalistic explanations don't have any explanatory power at all, because they're tantamount to magic. No, it's the same as saying, it would be the same as a creationist claiming that God creating the world and the universe and human beings and all of nature has got more explanatory power than the theory of evolution and the Big Bang. No, science has got explanatory power. Magic has got no explanatory power. Okay, well, have you seen the debate? You must have seen it. Let me know what you think. Do you agree with my comments? Okay, sorry, this video has been all over the place, what with Richard Dawkins and everything, but I'm just getting back into it. So it was good to watch that debate today, because I've kind of been doing other things and not really sort of keeping up with atheism, etc. But this debate really kind of enraged me, really, because I thought that Licona was absolutely preposterous. And I mean, Carrier's brilliant. I really do think he's absolutely amazing. He's one of the few scholars that off the bat, off the top of his head, he's got an answer for virtually anything you put to him within his context. He's absolutely amazing. The knowledge he's got is absolutely stunning. He's got absolutely all the arguments. He's got everything there, and I would pity anybody really that debates him, because there's absolutely nothing you could put to him that he couldn't handle. He is, I'm a big fan of his. I'm not 100% convinced yet that Jesus never existed, but I'm sort of inclining towards it. Okay, guys, that's all. Let me know what you think of this, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.